Every morning, a widow walks through Golden Gate Park and touches a rough wooden beam she built with her own hands. Years ago, after the great earthquake tore San Francisco apart, Maris Donnelly was told she was nothing. No record, no rations, no place to stand. But hidden inside a smoke-scarred notebook was proof powerful men wanted buried. When her name vanished from the ledgers, she chose not to disappear with it. What would you risk to make the world remember you? Stay with us until the end, and tell us where you're watching from. Before dawn, the earthquake splits San Francisco open, and Maris Donnelly feels it in her teeth before she understands it in her bones. The boarding house walls along Mission Street shudder once, then again harder, pitching crockery to the floor. Someone screams for St. Joseph. Someone else shouts that the gas lines will blow. Maris does not scream. She reaches for the small tin box beneath her bed, where she keeps two things: her husband's death certificate from St. Mary's Hospital and his wedding ring, which she has not worn since the burial at Holy Cross. When the second tremor throws her against the doorframe, she presses both objects into her coat pocket, as if paper and gold could steady brick and timber. Outside, Market Street looks wrong. Rails buckled where the streetcars of the United Railroads once ran straight and reliable. She steps over fallen signage from a tobacconist she used to pass every Thursday, the smell of smoke already climbing into her lungs. A man beside her mutters that this is worse than the '68 quake, that the city will not stand it. Maris does not answer. She moves, because stopping would mean remembering the hospital corridor where her husband coughed blood into a handkerchief and told her, "They owe you, Mayor." By the time she reaches the ferry building, the clock tower stands against a sky bruised by smoke, stubborn in a way that feels personal. People cluster near the waterfront clutching carpet bags, hat boxes, ledgers salvaged from offices along Montgomery Street. Someone says the ferries to Oakland are still running, that the Southern Pacific lines might hold. Maris lets herself imagine the crossing, the salt air scrubbing this night from her skin. She approaches a man she recognizes from the Union office near the Embarcadero, Mr. Larkin, who once shook her husband's hand after a meeting of the Dock Workers Association. "You said the payout was secured," she tells him, keeping her voice level. "You said the bank on California Street had the funds." Larkin's collar is askew, ash streaking his cheek. He does not meet her eyes. "The bank burned," he replies too quickly. "Records gone. Nothing anyone can do now." She watches his mouth form the words, notices how clean his boots are compared to the rest of him. "You promised," she says, softer. He shrugs, as if promises are light things easily dropped. When she asks where the records were kept, he turns away, already speaking to another man. In that small turn of his shoulders, she understands that the city has begun deciding who counts and who does not. The relief line stretches along the edge of the waterfront, winding past crates stamped with flour shipments and barrels that once held molasses. Volunteers ladle soup from dented pots, the smell thin but hopeful. Maris stands between a seamstress from Nob Hill and a Chinese laborer who keeps adjusting the brim of his hat, eyes fixed ahead. When her turn comes, the clerk behind the folding table studies her documents as if they are counterfeit currency. He wears a badge from the Relief and Red Cross Funds Committee, pinned neatly to his vest. "Widow?" he asks, glancing at the certificate. "No dependents?" She shakes her head. "No children." He purses his lips, then scribbles something on a pad. "Resources are for families first. Able women are expected to find work or depart before the army begins clearing unauthorized persons." She feels heat rise in her throat. "My husband paid union dues for 12 years, she says. "He died working the docks." The clerk looks past her. "You are not on the list." Next. The word lands like a stone. She does not move. "You're dismissing me?" she asks. He sighs, irritation tightening his face. "Madam, you are not a priority. Do not make this difficult." Behind her, the seamstress whispers, Let it go, dear, not unkindly. Maris folds the certificate with careful fingers, though her hands tremble. What is my name on your ledger? She asks the clerk, though she already suspects the answer. He flips pages without looking closely. No record. The Chinese laborer beside her murmurs, "They lost mine too," in halting English, not meeting her eyes. It is the first moment she feels less alone. The clerk leans forward, lowering his voice. "You would do better to board a ferry. The Presidio is organizing camps. Army sweeps will begin by nightfall." There is a warning in his tone, or perhaps a threat. Maris imagines rows of tents under military watch, dignity rationed alongside bread. "And if I stay?" she asks. He studies her, then says the word that brands her more than the smoke: useless. It is said quietly, almost bored, as if he is tired of repeating it. She feels the insult settle into her chest, heavier than the tremors that still ripple faintly beneath the pavement. She steps aside at last, but she does not step away. Instead, she moves toward a stack of discarded newspapers, grabbing a crumpled copy of the San Francisco Call, dated April 17th, the ink smudged by soot. She wraps the pages around her cut palms, binding them tight enough to sting. The headlines scream of devastation, but the paper serves her better as cloth. A boy no older than 15 offers her a tin cup of water. "You going east?" he asks, hopeful. "No," she answers, surprising herself with the steadiness of it. She walks back toward Market Street, past the shattered facade of a shop that once sold imported china, past a telegraph office where wires hang useless. At the corner of Kearney, she pauses, looking toward the direction of the docks where her husband spent his last healthy morning. "They owe you," she whispers, not as a plea but as a reminder. The words taste different now, less like grief and more like resolve. When another aftershock ripples through the ground, people gasp and scatter, but Maris remains where she is. She closes her fist around the wedding ring until the metal presses crescents into her skin. The ferry building clock continues to mark the hour, indifferent to who boards and who stays. She thinks of the clerk's ledger, of her name missing as if it had never existed, of Mr. Larkin's turned back. Something inside her hardens, not into bitterness, but into refusal. If she boards a ferry, she will become a story told in past tense, a widow who left. If she stays, she might yet force the city to write her name again. She looks down at her newspaper-wrapped hands, at the thin barrier between flesh and splinter. "I won't flee," she says aloud, though no one is listening. If she is going to be left with nothing, she will at least keep her name. Maris walks into Golden Gate Park with the certainty of someone who has already been refused once and will not ask again. Near Sharon Meadow, where families once gathered for Sunday picnics and boys kicked worn leather balls across the grass, she stops and presses her boot heel into the ground as if staking a claim. "This will do," she says quietly, though no one has asked her opinion. Around her, tents issued by the Relief and Red Cross Funds Committee flap in uneven rows, some already marked with chalk numbers. A woman from Hayes Valley watches her with open doubt. "You cannot build there," she calls out. "They assign spots." Maris does not argue. She kneels and sets down the redwood board she dragged from a collapsed warehouse off Howard Street, the grain still solid despite the burn along the edges. She produces a handful of bent nails and begins straightening them against a stone. The woman approaches, lowering her voice. "They will move you." Maris meets her gaze. "They will have to try." It is not bravado. It is calculation. She knows that a tent can be folded and taken, but wood demands effort. By dusk, a crude frame stands, and for the first time since Market Street, she feels the weight of something that belongs to her hands. Each night the structure grows, plank by plank, a torn canvas sheet stretched across the roof and anchored with rope salvaged from the Embarcadero docks. A young boy named Thomas, whose father once drove a streetcar along Geary Street, offers to hold the board steady. "I can hammer," he says, gripping a borrowed mallet with pride. "Then hammer straight," Maris replies, guiding his wrist. Nearby, women boil barley in dented pots, speaking in low tones about the price of the small wooden relief cottages, $2 a month if one is lucky enough to be listed. "My name was there yesterday," an older woman insists. "Today it is gone." Maris listens, not interrupting, and notices how the loss of ink on paper wounds more deeply than the loss of walls. She trades a strip of canvas for a length of twine from a man who claims he once worked at the Palace Hotel. "Everything burns the same," he mutters, staring at nothing, "rich or poor." Maris does not answer, but she knows that what survives afterward does not burn the same way. The rumors reach her before the facts do. A seamstress from Nob Hill swears she saw sacks of flour diverted toward a private cart bound for a warehouse near Polk Street. A labourer whispers that certain names are quietly removed from the ledgers so that rations can be reassigned. Maris witnesses it herself when a mother clutching two small children is told her family is not registered. "We were here yesterday," the woman says, her voice thin but steady. "You wrote it yourself." The clerk barely glances up. No record. The older child tugs at her skirt. "Mama, I am hungry." The words are simple, but they cut. Maris steps forward without thinking. "Write their names again," she says. The clerk frowns. "This is not your concern." Maris holds his gaze until he looks away. That evening, she sits inside her half-finished shack and begins her own list in the margin of the San Francisco Call, copying names she hears, adding details she can verify. She writes carefully, as if each letter carries weight. It is not official, it is not sanctioned, but it is real. The stranger arrives in the afternoon, when the sun hangs low, and the park feels less like refuge and more like negotiation. He wears polished boots and a coat brushed clean of ash, a detail that does not escape her. "Mrs. Donnelly," he says, as if he has practiced the name. "You are making yourself quite visible." She does not ask how he knows her. "Visibility was never the problem," she replies. He smiles, though his eyes remain cold. "These lists you are keeping, they can cause confusion. Relief work requires order." She folds the newspaper page in half, slipping it into the tin box beneath her plank bed. "Order without fairness is only control," she says, surprising herself with the sharpness of it. He studies the shack, tapping a boot against the doorframe. "Unauthorized structures will be removed during the army inspections. It would be unfortunate if yours were deemed unnecessary." The word lingers between them. Unnecessary. She thinks of the clerk at the waterfront, of the word useless. "Then you had better bring more men," she answers quietly. That night, as the camp settles into uneasy rest, Maris wakes to the scrape of wood against wood. She steps outside to find two figures tugging at the doorframe, attempting to pry it loose. "It is only boards," one mutters. "No one will miss it." She does not shout. Instead, she lifts the hammer Thomas used earlier and strikes the plank beside their hands, close enough to startle, not to injure. "I will," she says, her voice steady. One of the men recognizes her, perhaps from the relief line, perhaps from the list. "You are making trouble," he warns. "No," she replies, "I am keeping count." They leave without further argument, and she stands alone for a moment, her pulse loud in her ears, though she refuses to call it fear. She reinforces the frame with an extra board, driving each nail deep until the structure answers back with firmness. By morning, the shack stands more solid than before, not because it is strong, but because she has chosen it to be. Thomas arrives with a small bundle of nails he claims to have found near Stanyon Street. "They cannot take this," he says, looking up at her as if she holds the authority of a mayor. Maris kneels to his height. "They can try," she answers, placing his hand against the wood. "But this is ours as long as we stand beside it." The stranger with the polished boots watches from a distance, saying nothing. The lists remain hidden, names pressed between newsprint and tin. The shack is no longer just shelter. It is proof that she refuses to vanish. Maris recognizes the tin box before she sees it clearly. It is dented along one corner, the lid warped from heat, the faint imprint of a shipping label from the Embarcadero still clinging to the side. She had last seen it at St. Mary's Hospital, placed beneath the narrow bed where her husband lay coughing, his fingers too weak to hold a pen steady. Now it sits among salvaged belongings, stored near a temporary depot off Van Ness Avenue, guarded by a tired clerk who barely glances up when she gives her name. "Donnelly," she repeats, sliding the death certificate across the makeshift table. He rummages without care, then pushes the scorched box toward her. She knows it by touch before she lifts it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, is the notebook. The pages are smoke-stained but intact. She opens it with reverence, her thumb tracing the familiar slant of her husband's handwriting. Dates, figures, initials, references to United Railroads contracts and emergency permits issued after the quake. "Paid in advance," one line reads. "Cash delivered near Montgomery Street." Her breath tightens. This is not a grieving man's private record. It is evidence. She presses the notebook to her chest, understanding that what she holds is both weapon and inheritance. Back at the shack in Sharon Meadow, she reads by the thin light that slips through the canvas roof. The names are not random. She recognizes one from the relief committee, another from a warehouse near Polk Street where flour had been rerouted. Amounts are listed beside phrases like temporary wiring authorization and streetcar line restoration, expedited. Her husband had not been a reckless man. If he wrote it down, he meant for it to matter. Thomas peers over her shoulder. "Is that your husband's book?" he asks. She nods. "It tells the truth," she replies, more to herself than to him. Martha Henriksen arrives carrying a parcel of bread wrapped in cloth. She's been quiet in her kindness, never asking for thanks. When Maris shows her a page, Martha's jaw tightens. "You realize what this means," she says. "Men with clean boots do not like to be named." Maris thinks of the stranger who warned her about unauthorized structures. "They already do not like me," she answers. The realization settles between them, heavy and unavoidable. Speaking will cost her safety. Silence will cost her soul. The officials come 2 mornings later, uniforms crisp, despite the ash that still stains parts of the city. A lieutenant from the Presidio steps forward, flanked by volunteers carrying clipboards. "Unauthorized shelters will be cleared," he announces, scanning the row of structures. "Occupants will be relocated to regulated camps under Army supervision." His eyes land on Maris's shack. "You have been advised." She steps out, notebook tucked beneath her coat. "On what grounds?" she asks. He consults a list. "No official relief registration." Martha moves beside her without invitation. "Her name is Donnelly," she says firmly, "widow of Patrick Donnelly, dock worker." The lieutenant shrugs. "There is no record." The phrase feels rehearsed, hollow. Maris feels her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice pressing against her ribs. She could fold the notebook back into the tin box and walk quietly to the Presidio tents, or she could carry it into the open and force them to acknowledge what they have erased. "Then we will go to the waterfront," she says, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers, "and we will correct the record." She walks to the ferry building as she did on the first morning, the clock tower unchanged in its silent authority. The relief table is set up again near the edge of the waterfront, clerks scribbling names, ferries moving in the distance toward Oakland. The same clerk who once dismissed her looks up, irritation flickering across his face. "You again," he mutters. "I have brought documentation," she replies, placing the notebook on the table with deliberate care. "And additional names." A small crowd gathers, drawn not by spectacle but by hunger for fairness. She opens to a page and reads aloud, her voice clear despite the shaking in her hands. Dates, sums, references to contracts granted in haste. The clerk's expression shifts from annoyance to alarm. "This is not the proper venue," he insists. "It is the only venue left to me," she answers. Martha steps forward, her presence solid and unyielding. "If you remove her, you remove the evidence," she says, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The words travel quickly. People begin murmuring, some nodding, some whispering that they have seen similar disappearances from the ledger. The lieutenant from the Presidio arrives, summoned by the rising voices. He demands to see the notebook. Maris hesitates only a moment before handing it over, refusing to lower her gaze. He flips through the pages, his jaw tightening with each line. "These are serious allegations," he says. "They are my husband's handwriting," she replies. "He died believing someone would read them." There is a silence that feels different from the earlier dismissals. Heavier, less certain. Martha places a hand on Maris's shoulder, not for comfort but for solidarity. "She will not be moved," Martha states plainly, "not while she has breath and proof." The simplicity of it steadies Maris more than any argument could. The lieutenant looks at the crowd, at the growing attention, and makes a decision that is not quite justice but is not erasure either. "The shelter remains pending investigation," he says at last. "It is not an apology, but it is space." In the weeks that follow, the shack at Sharon Meadow stands where it always has, no longer a defiant outlier, but a quiet testament. People pass by and nod, some pressing small offerings of bread or nails into Maris's hands. The notebook is copied and safeguarded, names preserved in more than one place. On a fog-laced morning, when the park feels almost like itself again, Maris takes her husband's wedding ring from her pocket. She threads it onto a narrow ribbon and ties it to a beam inside the shelter, the knot firm, deliberate. Thomas watches in silence. "Is that goodbye?" he asks softly. She considers the question. "No," she answers. "It is a promise." The ring catches the light that filters through the canvas, steady and unashamed. She survived, she spoke, and she remains. "What did you think of Maris's choice to stay when the whole city tried to erase her? If you were in her place, would you take the ferry and disappear, or build that shack in Golden Gate Park and fight back? Tell us in the comments. And when she opens the notebook and reads those names, do you think she should expose them or keep quiet to survive? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more human stories of courage, loss, and second chances.